Hey guys, tonight we journey back to a time before Wi-Fi, before streaming, before TikTok dances, yeah, way back, to ancient Egypt. But instead of talking about pyramids or pharaohs you've heard of a million times, we're going deep into the sand to find the forgotten women who ruled Egypt in full fake beard glory. Picture it, the torchlight flickers against limestone columns, the scent of sandalwood hangs in the hot, dry air, and you're being led down a hallway of hieroglyphs that whisper tales the textbooks skim over. You probably won't survive this, not because it's dangerous, but because you might actually fall asleep from how soothingly boring these powerful women made ruling a vast empire look. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. Are you in bed, on the couch, or fake listening during a Zoom call? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing barefoot in the middle of a vast stone courtyard, warm slabs underfoot, and before you, sitting on an obsidian throne, is Hatshepsut. Not a name you heard in school? Exactly. She's the Beyoncé of ancient Egypt who got edited out of the Spotify playlist. Born around 1507 BCE, she was the daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I and married her half-brother, classic ancient Egypt move, Thutmose II. But don't worry, you don't have to keep track of all the Thutmoses. Just remember, he dies young and she steps in as regent for his infant son. And then, she just keeps ruling. For over 2 decades. Calm, unbothered, moisturized, running an empire like it's a pottery class she forgot to RSVP to. But here's the twist. To be taken seriously, she puts on all the gear of male kingship. That includes the traditional pharaoh's false beard, yeah, a whole strap-on chin situation, and the headdress, the short kilt, the full regalia. She didn't try to feminize the role. Nope. She just became pharaoh. Not queen. Pharaoh. And somehow, the entire priesthood just kind of nodded along like, yes, totally normal, beard-wearing lady in charge, moving on. You walk through her palace and notice something peculiar. Every statue, every carving, Hatshepsut appears as a man. Even her inscriptions call her His Majesty. It's almost like she knew exactly how to game the system, play by their visual rules so they wouldn't challenge her power. It's the ancient equivalent of sending emails with too many exclamation points just to be heard. Still, historians argue whether this masculine presentation was a necessity or a flex. Was she bowing to gender norms? Or rewriting the rules in plain sight? And why did she make up a divine origin story that the god Ammonius literally fathered her, like some soap opera twist? As the sun sets over the Valley of the Kings, you lean against a column and listen. The stone seems to hum with centuries of quiet competence. Hatshepsut didn't conquer massive lands like Ramses II. She didn't build pyramids that touched the clouds. But she made Egypt stable, peaceful. She opened trade routes, commissioned art, and strengthened temples. It's the kind of reign history finds too boring to remember. You know what else she did? She brought back frankincense trees from the land of Punt. Yes, actual trees. Imagine being so extra, you import trees by boat. And what did she do with the sap? Turned it into incense, cosmetics, and possibly the first luxury skincare line. Probably would have sold out in Sephora in 5 minutes. But you can feel it already, this calm, this stillness that her rule brought. Like a long exhale through your nose. No major wars, no rebellions, just a woman with a beard and a dream. And her temple, wait till you see it. You take a slow step forward, toward the next chapter in her reign. One sandal squeaks on the stone. You're about to enter the cliffside marvel of Deir el-Bahari, where stories are carved in sunlight and shadow. And your footsteps echo softly now, because you're walking into Deir el-Bahari, the mortuary temple Hatshepsut built for herself like the ancient world's version of a personal LinkedIn page, just, etched in stone and built into a mountain. The air here feels different, cooler. You pause in the colonnade, tall pillars stretching skyward like arms in prayer. Birds flutter above, dipping between ledges. You run your fingers along the warm sandstone wall, brushing centuries of wind-smoothed reliefs. Each mural is a message, carefully curated propaganda, but prettier. This isn't just a tomb. It's a story, a brand, a legacy. Hatshepsut made sure you'd remember her, even if the world eventually tried to forget. She carved her epic voyage to the land of Punt in stunning detail. There are ships, exotic animals, gold rings, and towering incense trees mid-harvest. You picture her squad gliding down the Red Sea, sails billowing, everyone sipping date wine and gossiping about pyramid influencers. But as your eyes adjust to the shadows, something shifts. The murals, there are gaps. You notice figures chipped away, faces missing, names carefully chiseled out. Whole scenes defaced. It's like someone came through with an ancient chisel and petty energy. Because someone did. After her death, Hatshepsut's stepson, Thutmose III, rose to power. And here's the weird part. For the first 2 decades of his rule, he left her legacy alone. But then, suddenly, erasure mode activated. Her statues were smashed, her name scrubbed out, and her images defaced like some ancient breakup revenge. Historians still argue whether this was spite, politics, or an organized attempt to restore order. Some say Thutmose III was just flexing his power. Others suspect priests or political advisors were behind it, anxious to restore the gender norms she'd expertly bulldozed. Either way, it worked, kind of. Later scribes didn't mention her. Her memory slipped through the cracks for centuries, until 19th century archaeologists, dusty hats, tweed jackets, and all, pieced together her story from fragments in the dirt. Still, standing here, you feel her. Not in some woo-woo ghosty way, but in the confidence radiating from the art she left behind. One panel shows her being suckled by Hathor, goddess of motherhood and kingship. Not your average bedtime story, but hey, branding. And what a brand! Imagine commissioning entire walls of hieroglyphs just to explain that the gods literally demanded you be queen. Divine birth? Royal blood? Double check. Beard? Triple check. Hatshepsut knew what she was doing. She used religion, architecture, and storytelling to reshape public perception without ever raising a sword. You reach a quiet chamber, one less trafficked by tourists, still echoing with the scent of stone dust. Here, one of her statues remains almost untouched. Her face is calm, regal, not smug, but deeply self-assured. This was a woman who outmaneuvered generals, priests, and entire dynasties just by playing a long, silent game. And if you're wondering how she managed all this without triggering a palace coup, that's the thing. She didn't just seize power. She eased into it, gradually. First as regent, then as co-ruler, and finally as pharaoh. It's like watching someone slowly slide into the driver's seat while the original driver is still buckling their seatbelt. It's tempting to imagine this as a feminist victory story. A glass ceiling shattered in 1478 BC. But remember, Egypt was complicated. Gender fluidity in iconography was weirdly common. Gods shifted forms all the time. Pharaohs were considered divine. So, if a woman embodied male kingship, people didn't riot in the streets. They just sort of adjusted their expectations and carried on with pyramid taxes. That said, you still have to laugh a little when you learn that Hatshepsut had herself depicted giving offerings to herself in some temple scenes. That's not a typo. That's divine bureaucracy at its finest. You really can do anything when you're the state and the religion. Your sandals crunch on the temple steps now as you begin to climb higher. The breeze grows stronger, sweeping across the desert and flapping your loose linen tunic like a dramatic cape. You glance back one last time at the rows of columns and sunlit murals, knowing that so much of her story was lost, then found, and then debated endlessly. Still, her temple stands. Not as flashy as the Great Pyramids. Not as blood-soaked as Ramses' battle monuments. But strong. And still whispering across 4,000 years. Ahead, deeper in the sands of time, more names shimmer faintly, women who ruled in shadow, half hidden behind myth and male dynasties. You're about to meet the others now, the ones so buried in legend, scholars can't even agree if they really existed. But the wind carries their stories anyway. You follow it, past a row of stone lions, into the dustier corners of Egypt's history. And the silence out here is thicker than the temple walls. You're no longer in the golden glow of Hatshepsut's reign. Now you're deeper in the desert, where history frays at the edges and names vanish like footprints in sand. Here, in the fading heat of a forgotten morning, another figure steps forward, Sobenfur. She ruled near the end of the 12th dynasty, around 1806 BCE, and she's kind of like that mysterious aunt at family reunions. Nobody talks about her much, but she once bought a crocodile for a pet and never returned it. Literally. Sobenfur's name means beauty of Sobuk, and Sobuk, if you're rusty on your gods, was the ancient Egyptian crocodile god. Fierce, plumpy, unbothered. He symbolized strength and fertility, great qualities when your empire is trying not to collapse under its own ambition. Sobenfur leaned into that energy hard. She didn't just honor Sobuk, she fused his image with royal authority. And yep, you guessed it, she too wore the pharaoh's regalia, stepping into the throne after the death of her brother, Amenemhat IV. But here's the catch, there were no male heirs left. Egypt was on the brink. She didn't claw her way to the throne, she was the only logical choice. So they let her rule briefly, just under 4 years. No wars, no coups, no pyramid meltdowns. Just smooth governance, temple restoration, and probably some intense crocodile fan art. You stroll through the ruins of her brief reign, mostly lost under the sands and modern irrigation projects. There aren't many statues of her, but those that remain show her with a mix of male and female features. Not quite as committed to the fake beard cosplay as Hatshepsut, but definitely following the dress code. Historians still argue whether she truly ruled as a pharaoh or just as a placeholder, an interregnum queen keeping the chair warm until a male heir emerged. But her inclusion in king lists suggests something more. She signed documents. She built structures. And she left just enough evidence to whisper, "I was here." You turn a corner in your dreamlike stroll and step into mistier territory now. Stories less confirmed, more legendary. Ever heard of Nitocris? She might be real. She might not. It depends on who you ask and how deep their ancient texts go. The Greek historian Herodotus, who was basically the TMZ of the ancient world, wrote about her. He claimed she was a queen who avenged her brother's murder by inviting all the conspirators to a banquet, and then flooding the banquet hall with the Nile, drowning them in vengeance and soggy appetizers. Definitely not boring. Probably not true. Some Egyptologists say Nitocris was invented or misidentified, possibly confused with a male ruler whose name got mangled in translation. Others say there was a woman who ruled during a chaotic, poorly documented period between dynasties, but her legacy was buried by the political mess of the time. You sit down near the edge of a ruined bathhouse, maybe the same one from the story, maybe not. The stones are cracked, sun-bleached. The wind picks up a little and carries the scent of salt and thyme. Was Nitocris a real queen? A literary ghost? Or maybe both? The thing is, in ancient Egypt, female power wasn't always rejected. It just had to be disguised, mythologized, or erased later. If a woman ruled, it was either because she was unusually capable, or things had gotten so bad, people would accept anyone with a pulse and royal blood. But time is funny. The names of conquerors echo through tombs, but the women who saved the country from unraveling? Their stories dissolve into legend, then into silence. You start to see the pattern, don't you? A female pharaoh rises, rules wisely, keeps the system humming, then dies. And slowly, chisels come out. Statues get accidentally knocked over. Inscriptions are adjusted. And the next few centuries act like she was never there. Yet somehow, even after all that, you're here, centuries later, in your bed listening to these stories. The world forgot them, and yet you're imagining them now. Their names ride the currents of time like lotus petals on the Nile. You press your hand against a faded mural, just the edge of a figure remains. A faint outline of a headdress. Maybe a necklace. Probably a queen, maybe a myth. Either way, she held the crook and flail once. She gave orders in temples where the gods listened. She knew how to command in a man's world, even when no one wrote it down. The Nile is quieter now in your ears. The wind shifts, and ahead, you sense another chapter waiting. Not more names, but a pattern. A deeper reason why women in ancient Egypt wore the beard, held the scepter, and still got left out of the documentaries. You rise and follow it. One sandal slides into the dust. The sun dips low, and you move toward the light of torches ahead, where symbols mean everything, and meaning is always up for debate. And now you're walking along the painted walls of time itself, where every flicker of torchlight casts shadows shaped like hieroglyphs. The corridor you're in, metaphorically or maybe in some dreamy desert liminal space, feels narrower now, as if the stories themselves are trying not to be overheard. You're beginning to notice something, patterns hidden behind the dust. All these forgotten female pharaohs, all their quiet erasures, have a common thread. They kept Egypt running. Not warring, not conquering, not building massive death pyramids just to show off. No, they governed, maintained, smoothed over centuries of royal chaos like aloe on a sunburn. And that might just be why they were forgotten. You stop to examine a wall carving. The figure's posture is commanding, chin lifted, beard in place, but the face is scratched out. Not destroyed in a rage, but methodically, like erasing pencil from papyrus. Intentional, clinical, and very likely institutional. It was systemic. Because, see, ancient Egypt had this whole ideology of Ma'at, the principle of truth, order, and cosmic balance. Pharaohs were the human embodiment of that balance. They were expected to keep the sun rising, the Nile flooding, and the taxes flowing without tipping the divine apple cart. Now imagine how that cosmic contract got a little fidgety when a woman showed up wearing the double crown. Even if she ruled better than most of the guys. Even if she held the priesthood together with diplomatic duct tape. Historians still argue whether women pharaohs were anomalies or natural products of Egypt's unique structure. Some say the culture was progressive for allowing women to inherit and own property, while others point out that most female rulers only rose to power in times of crisis, when the patriarchy had momentarily fallen asleep on the job. But either way, these women weren't revolutionary outliers. They were part of Egypt's fabric. The system allowed them in just long enough to fix the machine, and then quietly nudged them back out once it was running again. You take a step farther. The air smells of dry ink and candle smoke. On one fragment, you see the faint outline of a woman with both the royal headdress and a breastplate. Her body is turned slightly, like she's stepping sideways through history itself, neither fully seen nor fully invisible. And this brings us to one of the strangest quirks of ancient Egyptian rule: gender fluidity in royal iconography. This is where things get weird and kind of cool. See, unlike in most ancient cultures, Egypt allowed its rulers to be presented with a mix of traditionally male and female traits. It wasn't about gender in the modern sense. It was about symbolism, power, stability. The pharaoh had to be a divine figure, and in their divine mythology, gods shape-shifted all the time. Horus, Isis, Ba, they weren't boxed in. So, when a woman became pharaoh, she didn't say, "Hey, let's tear it all down." Instead, she said, "Sure, hand me the beard, I've got this." And honestly, you admire that. They didn't pretend to be men, they performed kingship. They leaned into the aesthetic because the aesthetic was the job. You pause and think about it, how revolutionary it is to adopt symbols that didn't fit your identity just to keep the kingdom afloat. Not because you wanted power for power's sake, but because someone had to keep the taxes collected and the Nile calendar on track. One statue, barely intact, shows a female pharaoh giving offerings to the gods. Again, it's that same divine loop Hatshepsut loved. Offering to yourself as a god, receiving it as a mortal. Efficient, ego-boosting, a little hilarious. You wonder if any of them ever rolled their eyes while having to commission yet another image of themselves triumphing over chaos. Like, sure, I'll pose with a mace again. Yes, that's how people know I'm legit. And behind all that, actual leadership. These weren't ceremonial figureheads. They appointed viziers. They oversaw building projects. They supervised foreign trade, harvests, temples, taxation. They calmed famines, quieted rebellions, and all of it while straddling a role they were never meant to hold, at least not permanently. That temporariness? That's the quiet heartbreak behind their stories. They were almost always followed by efforts to scrub the slate. To say, well, that was unusual, let's never speak of it again. You walk through a hall of empty niches, places where statues once stood. The sand creeps in, soft and restless. You wonder how many more names were never recorded, how many tombs never even got built because history was already preparing to forget. And here you are, padding through their memories with bare feet and curious ears, trying to stitch the fragments back together. But wait, you hear something. Not literal sound, but memory. A name brushing against your thoughts like wind through papyrus leaves. Tusret. She was the last ruler of the 19th dynasty. Brief reign. Big drama. Tusret came after the death of her husband, Seti II. She initially ruled as regent for his stepson, then later declared herself pharaoh in her own right. Her rule, like many others, was marked by some success and then chaos. The civil war maybe usurped by Setnacht, who founded the 20th dynasty and, in true tradition, decided to wipe her memory clean. Surprise! She had a tomb in the Valley of the Kings. Massive. Ambitious. It was later usurped by a male pharaoh. Pattern, meet, rinse, and repeat. But here's the thing, each time one of these women ruled, Egypt didn't fall apart. It ran. The Nile still flooded. The temples stayed busy. The peasants planted barley and complained about taxes just like always. And maybe that's the biggest legacy they left behind. Not the statues or the tombs, but the quiet fact that a woman could rule Egypt as well as any man. Maybe better. You pause now at the edge of a cliff. Below you, the Nile snakes through the valley, silver in the moonlight. The wind is gentle. You close your eyes and try to picture each of them standing beside you, bearded, robed, regal, and very much real. Their stories were forgotten, but not lost. And there's still more to uncover. You turn from the cliff edge, your sandals brushing stone. One more corridor. One more chapter. One more echo waiting to be heard. You keep walking. Or maybe gliding now. The dust doesn't crunch beneath your feet anymore. It's soft, like powdery moonlight. The further you go, the less the path looks like stone and more like memory itself, shifting and forming under your weight. You're deep inside the tomb of time now, where the walls hum with secrets no one thought you'd care to ask about. But you're asking. And you're about to meet someone Egypt didn't want you to remember. Sobenfru, possibly the first confirmed female pharaoh of Egypt. No, not queen, like someone's +1 at a royal gala. She was pharaoh, top of the food chain, ruling solo. You see her image emerging from the gloom now, broad shoulders, straight spine, formal beard, and a name that literally honors the crocodile god Sobuk. That's right, your girl went full reptile deity on her royal branding. The Nile's apex predator, channeled into the grace of a human ruler. Now that is marketing. Sobenfur ruled at the tail end of Egypt's 12th dynasty, around 1806 BC. Her reign only lasted a few years, but those years were dense with transition. The Middle Kingdom had just come off a high, peace, wealth, architecture boom, and Sobenfru stepped in to keep that engine purring when her brother Amenemhat IV died without a male heir. What do you do when your kingdom is freshly without a ruler and everyone's sweating over dynastic collapse? You don the crown, strap on the beard, and start governing. But her rule wasn't just symbolic. She oversaw construction projects, including additions to the northern part of the labyrinthine mortuary complex at Hawera. Yes, the one ancient writers later called the labyrinth with a capital L. Historians still debate whether she completed it or expanded it, but her fingerprints are all over it like someone left the light on in the back hallway of ancient history. And of course, the record of her reign is thin. Surprise! No full statues survived intact. No tomb has been definitively found, though some scholars suspect it may lie unfinished or looted beneath the sands. Her legacy, like so many, was swallowed by the silence that followed her. You pass her ghost now, regal and unbothered, staring directly ahead. You can almost hear her whisper, "I held it together when no one else would." That's enough. You want to agree, but you're not alone. In the next alcove, another face appears, one with deeper shadows around the eyes. Her name? Nitocris. Here's the twist. Nitocris might not have even existed. You heard that right. Nitocris is part historical enigma, part ancient game of telephone. Egyptian king lists don't clearly mention her. Some scholars believe she's a garbled version of a male ruler named Neferkra II. You drift past her image, half-formed, eyes uncertain, smile like she knows a joke you'll never hear. Next up, Tuzret, or Tosret, depending on your pronunciation flavor. She's often the last entry on the female pharaoh list before the new kingdom takes over. Tuzret ruled during the late 19th dynasty, initially as regent for a boy king named Sipta. Once he died, either naturally or mysteriously, the jury's still out, Tuzret took full control. She ruled for roughly 7 years. Some inscriptions show her as pharaoh in her own right, complete with the cartouche and kingly epithets. She also started a lavish tomb for herself in the Valley of the Kings, KV-14. If that sounds familiar, it's because later, Setnacht, founder of the 20th dynasty, took over her tomb like a bad Airbnb guest, carved her name off the walls, and moved in. Historians still argue whether Tusret's reign was chaotic or calm. Some evidence points to civil unrest and collapse, while others suggest she was just another ruler swept away by Egypt's cyclical taste for drama. You pause to imagine her, seated on a throne carved with lotus and papyrus, eyes scanning a court full of whispers. She knows they'll erase her. She does it anyway. You wonder, did she think the tomb would keep her safe? That stone could outlast spite? You step past her into a narrow side tunnel now. Faint torchlight flickers across the wall, casting familiar shapes. Pyramids, ankhs, a crocodile wearing eyeliner. The usual. But this part feels different, because suddenly the story shifts, not to a pharaoh, but to the absence of them. After Tuzret, there's a long silence. Female pharaohs vanish from the record for centuries. It's not that women stopped existing. It's that history stopped seeing them. The kingdom moved on. Dynasties rose and fell. Temples crumbled. Sand one battle's stone could not. And still, the stories of these rulers stayed buried. Maybe because they didn't fit the hero-king narrative. Maybe because they governed instead of conquering. Maybe because they were efficient, not legendary. No splashy wars. No scandal scrolls. Just solid rule. And let's be honest, who carves a statue for a pharaoh who didn't kill anyone? You reach the end of the tunnel. Before you is a door. Ancient. And above it, a single image, a bearded woman, arms crossed, gaze forward. She's all of them. Sobenfer, Tuzra, maybe even Nitocris. She's what happens when power wears a dress and a crown and doesn't ask permission. You place your hand on the stone and feel the thrum of memory beneath it, persistent, soft, like a heartbeat. The stone door creaks open, not like in the movies, no dramatic groaning or sudden blast of torchlight. Just a sigh, like the tomb is relieved someone finally came back to listen. And inside? Silence. Not the dead kind. Not the creepy kind either. More like a library at 2 a.m. when the heat clicks and settles in the pipes, and the paper in the books rustles ever so slightly. It's a silence made of patience. Of centuries. You step in. Here, the forgotten stories of Egypt's female pharaohs aren't etched in walls or gold or dramatized on temple pillars. They float in the air like ancient dust motes, easy to miss if you're looking too hard, but unmistakable once they land on your skin. And as you breathe it in, you realize the truth. These women weren't exceptions. They were part of a broader thread. An older, deeper pattern Egypt tried to snip clean. But the thread survived. Somewhere in this chamber, hidden under layers of myth and ash, are echoes of rulers we haven't even named yet. You catch glimmers, flickering and half-translated, of other female figures who may have ruled without fanfare, without cartouches, without history giving them so much as a footnote. That's where your mind starts drifting to women like Ahhotep I. She wasn't a pharaoh by title, but she may as well have been. During Egypt's fight against the Hyksos invaders in the 17th dynasty, Ahhotep held the reins while the actual kings were either dead or too young to rule. She commanded loyalty, kept Upper Egypt from falling into chaos, and quite possibly led military campaigns herself. One artifact, an honorary golden fly necklace, suggests she earned it through bravery in battle. Imagine that. A general in linen robes, quietly keeping the kingdom stitched together while everyone else ran off to war. And when peace finally came, she didn't claim the throne. She stepped back, like an understudy who nailed the lead role and then melted back into the chorus. Of course, the records downplayed her, glossed her over with vague language. Titles like King's Mother or Great Wife. You know, supporting characters. But anyone who ruled in wartime from the throne room and kept the economy afloat is no background act. Then there's Meritneith, another shadowy name from Egypt's earliest dynasty. Possibly a ruler of the first dynasty in her own right, around 2950 BC. Her tomb at Abydos was nearly as grand as the king's, and she was buried with royal honors. Some scholars say she ruled as regent for a child king. Others say she was the king. But her name, her stature, and her grave suggest more than footnotes. Again, historians argue. Again, the truth gets foggy. So you begin to understand something. Egypt had a habit. Whenever a woman ruled, they called it exceptional. Then they moved on like nothing happened. And whenever they didn't quite like how she led, they carved her out of the story entirely. Statues shattered, names scratched off, temples converted. Even Hatshepsut, for all her grandeur, didn't escape this fate. But the real twist? Those efforts failed. Because you're here, listening, remembering, giving their stories weight again. In a way, that's immortality too. You pause in the center of this final chamber, and you hear them, not voices, not whispers. Just presence. Like someone standing behind you, just out of sight, arms folded, nodding once. And it hits you. You've walked through a history that didn't want to be easy, that wasn't neat or clean or golden-hued. This was politics and gender and erasure and survival. These women didn't just rule Egypt. They stabilized it. They held it steady when things could have crumbled. And for that, they were thanked with silence. But not anymore. Your mind begins to soften now, your steps slow. The room grows dimmer, but it's not scary. It's peaceful, like the end of a long day. You take one more look around. There are no more crowns. No more beards or scrolls or cracked stele. Just stillness. And now comes that soft winding down. Let the air grow heavy in your lungs now, like honey sliding slowly down the sides of a warm cup. Let your limbs sink deeper into your mattress, the sheets folding around you like linen burial cloth. Minus the creepy part, of course. The Nile flows far behind you now, quiet and blue-black, reflecting moonlight that no longer presses questions to your chest. All that digging, that unraveling, that long gentle march through silence, it's over for tonight. Close your eyes and remember the feel of sandstone under your fingertips, the hush of a hidden name echoing softly in a forgotten chamber. These pharaohs, the real ones, the maybe ones, the rewritten ones, they're all settled now, tucked back into the place you found them. Their secrets aren't gone, just sleeping. Let your breath match the slow rhythm of ancient winds rolling over distant dunes. No need to think anymore, or wonder, or chase footnotes through the dark. Tonight, you saw what history tried to bury. And you carried it here, into your own quiet. No more flickering torches or rustling scrolls. Just the hum of memory. The faint beat of a ceremonial drum far, far away. And the soft voice of a woman in gold saying, I ruled. I mattered. And now, I rest.